For all of human history, mankind has been on a relentless pursuit of more energy. First, discovering fire allowed us to cook our food and heat our homes. Then when we discovered coal, it allowed us to power steam engines, and it launched us into the Industrial Revolution. Next, when we discovered oil and gas, which were even more energy dense, that propelled us into the 20th century. And every step of the way, every time we discovered a new, more dense source of energy, it exponentially multiplied the wealth of humanity. In other words, finding new, denser sources of energy allow us to get far more for far less. And nuclear energy promised to do exactly that same thing yet again, powering the information age and teasing energy in the future that would be too cheap to meter. And for a while, these promises started to pay off and become reality. But then disaster hit. Nuclear reactor meltdowns triggered a cataclysmic shift in public sentiment. And for the last 50 years now, virtually all progress in nuclear energy has halted. Governments began implementing new regulations that made it almost impossible to innovate, made it extremely costly to build new plants. And by government decree, they even started decommissioning old existing power plants that still had years or even decades of life left. The dream of a future of abundant and cheap energy seemed lost to history. But something is now changing. Public sentiment, government policies, and education about nuclear energy is starting to gain momentum again. And for the first time in decades, it seems the tide may be shifting back in favor of nuclear energy. And for details we'll discuss throughout this video, I for one am very excited about this. So you can imagine my disappointment when a massive YouTuber decided to make a video about this very topic. If you don't know him, his name is Johnny Harris. From time to time, he makes videos about economic topics like the Silicon Valley bank failure, recessions, and inflation. He puts together top-notch, extremely high-quality videos. So when I saw he was making a video about addressing nuclear energy, I was excited. But as I got into it, I realized it was riddled with decades-old fears that have been debunked for a long time, pushing the exact same propaganda that many people are now realizing is just utter nonsense. And for a channel with 4 million subscribers and a video that got 1.5 million views, this was disheartening to say the least. And so I felt that it deserved a proper response. So let's start at the beginning.
Peace and prosperity, abundance. But then nuclear turned from darling to outcast.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union.
A state of emergency in 2 of the country's nuclear reactors.
The worst nuclear reactor accident to date.
So right off the bat, and this is something you can watch the video that he never goes back and corrects, he conflates nuclear bombs, nuclear weapons with nuclear energy accidents. Just in case you missed it, he literally shows a nuclear explosion
to outcast.
There has been a nuclear accident
right alongside footage of nuclear energy power plant accidents. So first of all, none of the 3 nuclear energy power plant accidents, the meltdowns that occurred, had nuclear explosions. This is not even a possibility. Many people are actually afraid of this, and so it's deceptive to push this fear when it's not even technically possible. Like, even if somebody wanted to intentionally cause an explosion, it would not be a nuclear explosion. So right off the bat, he's stoking old fears that have absolutely no basis in reality. Let's move on.
Let's do this. We went deep in this on very different sort of aspects of nuclear energy, but we agreed upon 3 major buckets that are the reasons we believe that nuclear has not sort of become the promise of the future. Let's call them nuclear's 3 big problems, and they are accidents, waste, and cost.
So it is possible that I'm splitting hairs here, but I think this needs at least a slight correction here because he identifies 3 main problems with nuclear: accidents, waste, and cost. And in reality, these are the 3 biggest perceived problems of nuclear. They are not the 3 actual problems with nuclear. Based on public perception and decades of propaganda, this is what people think are the biggest problems. Instead of accidents, the bigger problem would be perception and propaganda. Instead of waste, nuclear waste, the second biggest problem would be innovation. And instead of cost, the third biggest problem is actually regulation. It is a fact that all nuclear energy production throughout history has killed, at the highest estimates, a few hundred people. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, all people who work at nuclear energy power plants. The sum total of everybody killed from nuclear energy, which is different than nuclear weapons, is less than the number of people who die every single year from solar and wind. And yes, people die every year from solar and wind. When a wind turbine catches on fire, when somebody's up there doing repairs, when somebody falls off a roof when they're installing solar panels. These are real accidents with a real toll on human life, and they happen. It's not huge, but it's still more than nuclear. So again, this is a perception problem, not a reality problem. Now, regarding waste versus innovation, this is a problem, the waste problem, that has been solved for decades. First of all, there's not actually that much waste. If you took all nuclear waste combined, you could fit it on a football field 10 stories high. Now, that seems like a large area until you compare it to literally the entire world. And the fact that nuclear currently generates 10% of all global electricity, and it still has only produced that much waste, it's almost nothing compared to the energy it produces. And actually, nuclear is the only form of energy that has a waste that we don't export back out into our environment. All other forms of energy production release smoke and exhaust and particulates. Or in the case of wind turbines and solar panels, you bury them underground and they leach toxic chemicals into landfills for decades. And with nuclear, we actually do have the technology to store it deep underground, underneath water tables, and where earthquakes could impact it, in earthquake-proof casks that would be good for 100,000 years. But again, it's public perception of this that they think, hey, we're just burying this problem for somebody else. It's like, no, that's actually a real solution. It's not just delaying it. And then finally, the cost versus the regulation. This is entirely skipped over in the video, but the main cost with building a new nuclear power plant is the cost of adhering to the regulations. Now, some regular, normal safety regulations are perfectly fine here, but in most countries, the regulations are designed to inhibit nuclear power plants from being built. Therefore, the cost is extremely high, artificially so, and intentionally so. Government policies for decades have been designed to try and stop this from happening, not just to make it safer. This means new plants can take 10 years or longer, which means costs are prohibitive to ever building it in the first place. Not to mention, you get halfway through building it, the regulations change, and now you can't go back and change something, but it doesn't fit with the new regulations. And so your entire project is dead. Because of decades of this going on, there's been no innovation, no opportunity to innovate, build smaller reactors, safer reactors, more efficient reactors, plants that use the spent fuel from other less efficient reactors. So this is a regulatory thing that can be changed with a swipe of the pen by Congress or any government body around the world. It's not inherent in the cost of nuclear itself. Let's move on.
Build, there's a security risk.
Absolutely. And you see this in like polls and stuff. You have this public opinion poll here in the United States that asks Americans if they think we should use nuclear at all. Not like, should it be the #1 source or should we invest in it? It's, should we even use it as one of our sources? And look, almost 50% of people don't think we should even have it at all. Like, we should do away with nuclear power.
This is simply unacceptable. The entire rest of the video I could have chalked up to simple ignorance or political bias or incompetence on the part of his research. But this right here is the one thing that convinced me this video had to be made, because this is a straight up intentional lie. Take a look at that date one more time. 2019. What year is it today? 2023. I wonder, has this group published an update to this study, to this poll, since 2019? In the last 4 years, has public sentiment on this issue been gauged? Let me Google that for you. If we use the exact same source that Johnny Harris pulled from, we can see that they have indeed updated this since 2019, where he so conveniently selected the date in which the 50% number seemed most advantageous to his video. But we can see that since then, public sentiment has shifted drastically in favor of nuclear energy. And that's just one source from Gallup. If we look at Visconti research, the numbers are even more extreme. We can see in just the last couple of years, favorability to nuclear energy has skyrocketed to up to 77%. Let's move on.
Here's the data that really drove this home for me. So our Walden data, that's the source of the chart that I just showed.
To his credit, he does point out how safe nuclear energy is versus all other sources of energy production.
But a typical dose from living within a few kilometers of an operating nuclear power plant for 1 year is less than a typical chest x-ray and way less than a typical chest CT scan and less than a flight from New York to Tokyo.
Wow.
And here he shows how regular exposure from even living right next to a nuclear power plant gives you way less radiation than a normal person gets from regular everyday activities all the time. I think this is important for people to understand because we have this idea that radiation equals bad, but on a daily basis, humans are bombarded with radiation from all sorts of sources all day long, every day for our entire lives. It's a matter of dose, and it's a matter of frequency, and it's a matter of the type of radiation. And making this safe is something the nuclear energy industry solved a long time ago. Let's move on.
Anything else. And it's gone up over time. Like, meanwhile, you've got this yellow line, which is solar, and it's just like, there's been so much investment, there's been so much innovation in this. Dipped down, look at that.
Okay, so they are making a very false and deceptive comparison here between the cost of nuclear and the cost of something like solar. Again, the reason why nuclear is so costly is because it is artificially costly due to regulations. But not only that, they're comparing this against something like solar, which is artificially cheaper from two main reasons. Number one, government subsidies. So the exact opposite of what is happening to nuclear, which is governments trying to make it more expensive to stop it from happening. Governments are using tax money to subsidize solar so that it's cheaper. So it's not inherently cheaper. It is that way because of government money. But the second reason is actually because of things like slave labor to make solar panels, primarily in China. This is something that very few people talk about, but there is actual real slave labor going on to manufacture these things, which is driving down the cost artificially. This is not clean and this is not safe, especially for the people who are making these panels. If you remove governments, solar panels suddenly get a lot more expensive and nuclear gets a lot cheaper. But even with the current situation with what governments are doing to all forms of energy around the world, in the long term, nuclear still pays off more. Yes, the initial cost of building a new plant is much higher, but because of how long these plants last, in excess of 100 years, and how much energy they produce and the low cost of producing that energy over time, the payoff period is massive and they make a lot more money in the long run. So even in the current regulatory environment, in the long run, favor is still leaning towards nuclear. Okay, let's finish this video off with a few fast facts about nuclear. Number one, public sentiment is shifting and it is shifting quickly. People are realizing the benefits far outweigh the negatives for nuclear and they want more of it. Number two, policy is shifting. The Biden administration is pouring money into new production of nuclear in America. But it's not just the United States, it's all around the world, as even places like Sweden are rolling back regulations and starting to make a new massive shift towards nuclear. Number three, the oil and gas industry absolutely love green energy like wind and solar. Why? Because they're unreliable. Listen, if I was running a company and I had the ability, the chance to promote a competitor because I knew how bad that competitor would drive all the demand back towards me, I would do that. Oil and gas loves green energy like solar and wind because where do all of the grids turn when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not out. Right back into their loving embrace. But if I was an oil or gas giant, I would be deathly afraid of nuclear. And over the past decades, I would have done everything I could to make sure that public sentiment and public policy did not allow it to move forward, because it is an existential threat to me as an oil and gas company in this hypothetical example. Number 4, if we had enough nuclear energy, water itself would be extremely cheap and massively abundant. This is because you can pull fresh water out of the ocean through a process called desalination. This is where Israel gets all of their water from. They make so much fresh water that they actually export it to the region. And most of the world's population lives right near an ocean coastline, and so you build enough desalination plants, you have enough fresh water for most of the world's population. And don't worry, the brine that is created, the extra salty water that is created from that, is not actually an issue. Every single day, enough desalination happens from the sun, evaporating water out of the oceans. That's about 1 to 2 trillion tons of evaporation, water getting sucked out of the ocean every single day. That is 100 times larger than the amount of water the entire global population uses every single day. The world's population uses about 10 billion tons of water. So even if we sourced all of our water from desalination plants, the brine that we create from that would be less than 1% of the brine created from the sun over the entire ocean every single day. So not an issue. Number 5, we could have abundant, cheap gasoline that would actually be carbon neutral. So how is this possible? You can create gasoline by sucking it out of the air. Obviously, it's a little bit more technical than that, but essentially the bottleneck is electricity. It takes so much electricity to suck gasoline out of the air right now that it just costs more than producing it the traditional way. But if we had a ton of nuclear power plants, the cost of energy would be much lower, the cost of electricity would be much lower, and then it may actually be cheap enough to pull gasoline out of the air. Number 6, if you had a block of uranium the size of your iPhone, that would be enough uranium to produce all the electricity you will ever use in your entire life. Nuclear energy is extremely energy dense. Compare that to the amount of gasoline that you'll use, the volume of that in your life. And that's just for driving, let alone all the electricity you consume from all your electronics and everything like that. Number 7, uranium looks like it is primed for a massive breakout right now, with it going through a multi-year beautiful consolidation. Right now we're looking at the Global X Uranium ETF, symbol URA, and we see the exact same pattern with URNM, the Sprott Uranium Miners ETF, again looking primed for a massive breakout from this multi-year consolidation. And if you'd like to learn how I position myself for massive moves like this using small bets with massive upside and very, very, very little risk, you need to sign up for Heresy Financial University, my membership program where I teach you everything I know about money, where you can become financially literate and gain access to every single course I've ever made and every future course I will make, all unlimited access to my entire training library. Link is in the description below. In summary, don't believe the propaganda. Everybody has an agenda, and there's no such thing as unbiased information, even from me. Obviously, do your own research, and what you'll find is nuclear energy is extremely safe, energy abundant, and is the key to unlocking a beautiful, abundant future. As always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.